I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is why men lose interest in sex, familiarity. So this will be the first in a series of episodes that I'm envisioning on the subject of male sexuality. I think male sexuality is very often misunderstood. The stereotype is basically that if a woman has a pulse, a man is going to be interested in sleeping with her. Men are just horny dogs for whom the only satisfying amount of sex is more. And when it comes to long-term relationships, it's always the man who is DTF, and it's always the woman who has a headache. And it turns out, this isn't always true. Men can and do lose interest in sex, and this loss of desire can be devastating for their committed relationships. The issue is that there are many, often co-occurring reasons why this happens. It's far more complicated than it appears on the surface, and that's why I didn't think I could fit it all into a single episode. Some of these reasons are well known, others less so. But with this additional knowledge, both men and women can make appropriate adaptations to their sexual relationships to keep the spark alive. Let's begin with the first reason men lose interest in sex, which I'm calling familiarity. But first, a seemingly unrelated question whose relevance will become apparent later. Why don't siblings typically have sex with each other? I know, just go with me for a minute here. If you think about it, it's actually kind of strange that the rate of sibling incest is so low. We're talking about hormonal adolescents who, among other things, lack impulse control and available sexual outlets. But there is a distinct lack of interest for this at-hand solution. And it's not like people have to hold themselves back from sleeping with their siblings. They don't have to suppress their desire because in the vast majority of cases, there is no desire to suppress. In fact, so profound is the absence of felt attraction that the mere thought of such an act will fill most people with revulsion and disgust. How does this come to be? This profound aversion to incestuous relationships, which has been observed in functionally every human culture on the planet, is created through something called the Westermarck Effect. Basically, the anthropologist Edvard Westermarck noticed that there was a conspicuous absence of marriages among adults who were raised together from a very young age, irrespective of whether those adults were genetically related. This observation has been subsequently corroborated by a host of evidence from Israeli kibbutzim, where large groups of children are raised in communal environments, even when they are unrelated. Children raised in the same peer group almost never develop sexual relationships later in life. So what does this mean? The Westermarck effect suggests that it is technically not genetic similarity that turns off sexual desire, but rather spending a certain amount of time together in family-like conditions, especially early in life. And this kind of makes sense. Throughout most of our history, humans haven't had DNA tests to establish consanguinity, who is related to who, and the sheer fact of that relation isn't always entirely obvious. While this is true in today's day and age, it was even truer in many of the tribal communities where paternity was uncertain at best, within which humans have mostly lived throughout their history. The Westermarck effect helps prevent inbreeding in situations where a person might be dealing with a close relation. And this is important because inbreeding creates a host of genetic issues that were more often avoided in communities that evolved a disgust reaction to in-group sexual relationships. But the Westermarck effect suggests that it's not consanguinity itself, but familiarity that does the trick. A conclusion that is further strengthened, for example, by the disproportionately high rate of incest among siblings who were separated at birth, that is, first-degree relatives who did not grow up together and who were reunited later in life. If you appreciate the insights on this channel, I would highly encourage you to get your hands on a copy of my book, The Value of Others. Over the course of 432 pages, I delve deep into my economic model of relationships and explain the behavior of both men and women in the game of mating and dating. I also provide a lot of actionable advice on how to get and keep more of what you want in the sexual marketplace. Once you read The Value of Others, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Now available in ebook, audiobook, and paperback formats. The links are in the description. The idea here is that a kind of negative sexual imprinting occurs when people spend a certain amount of time together under family-like conditions. The data suggests that there is a sensitive period for this imprinting, namely 0 to 6 years old. However, what I'm proposing is that a Westermarck-like effect, something not as powerful as the one observed in children, but with a certain vestigial potency, persists into adulthood. The idea is that adults who spend a certain amount of time together under family-like conditions tend to experience diminished sexual attraction or even sexual aversion to each other. And this is certainly what occurs in the modern marriage archetype. Two people, largely isolated from their extended families and communities, who spend an inordinate amount of time together. If I'm correct, then this familiarity would produce a kind of sexual decathexis in which desire is removed from conscious experience as a result of a Westermarck-like effect. And this might help to explain why, in most traditional communities, men and women don't actually spend a lot of time together. The men spent their time with other men, hunting and tool making, and the women spent their time with other women, raising children and preparing food. A group that intermixed too much would likely experience a decrease in sexual desire, which might prove detrimental to the growth and/or sustainability of that community. And this kind of makes sense. Attraction kind of depends on a lack of familiarity, which is why people hide behind screens of all kinds in the courtship process. Women hide behind makeup and mystique. Men hide behind boldness and charm. Remove those screens too soon, and the attraction evaporates. However, it gets harder and harder to hide when you live under the same roof day in and day out. You see things you'd rather not see. You hear things you'd rather not hear. You smell things you'd rather not smell. The fantasy of the other disappears in favor of an emergent reality, namely that you're dealing with someone like anyone else who probably isn't all that special. Just like we might consider it faintly ridiculous that anyone might be head over heels in love with our sibling, like, don't they know who they're dealing with? We typically don't feel powerfully attracted to people that we know very well. In any case, this is one of the reasons why men lose interest in sex. They become overly familiar with their partners. However, this can be prevented by maintaining a good deal of spaciousness in your relationships. Prioritize less frequent, higher quality interactions over more frequent, lower quality interactions. In general, spending less time together should help to keep the spark alive longer. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. And please send this episode to someone who you think might benefit from its message, as it's word of mouth referrals like this that really help to make the channel grow. You can also go to my website if you're interested in pursuing some other lines of inquiry or value. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter in which I write original content, or potentially book a one-on-one paid consultation with yours truly. There's also my book, The Value of Others, in which I explore the underlying dimensions of relationships, and my private community, The Captain's Quarters, where I host bi-monthly live group consultation sessions. The links to everything are in the description below. Check them out. A lot of great value there. As always, I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening.